Well, we're here at the field and we've got the Bytefrost ready to test. I wish I could tell you it was a lovely day and it was a nice walk here, but I can't tell you the amount of mud and water and general wetness I've walked through. It's really miserable. You don't want to land, well, anywhere really. It's all absolutely soaking. I got my quads wet just bringing them here on the backpack. Right, so yes, testing out Bytefrost. First thing I'm going to do is plug this in and try and adjust the camera to make it similar than we've got. Basically, look at the landscape, look at the monitor, see if we can get it the same. Rob told me that he'd whopped all the brightness way up previously because it was so dim when he went out. So what I might do is just do a reset and go from there and see if we get a better picture. But yeah, let's check it out.
So what I'm doing here is just looking through my goggles while I'm adjusting the camera, and as I mentioned, I did a camera reset first off and it didn't seem to do much. It still looked very bright, so I went in and I started putting the brightness downwards. Now this was interesting itself. You'll see as the brightness goes down, there's suddenly a time when it just changes completely, and looking through my goggles and checking it with the sky, this looked about right, which told me that perhaps my goggles had their brightness and contrast set a bit differently, because you will see that this looks a little bit oversaturated. But I messed around with basically the colours, and essentially I went with something that looks quite a bit like this. You see that colour gain is probably up way too high for what it looks like here, but in the goggles it looked absolutely fine. And I couldn't see the screen brightly enough in the sunlight to be able to test this, so it's going to look a little bit weird in the camera, but you know, that's just the way it's going to be, I'm afraid. Anyway, first off, we went and we did a 25 milliwatt flight to see how that copes. So let's take a look at that now. So off we go now with the 25 milliwatt test, and I'm starting off by flying directly behind myself with everything facing the other direction, and already we're getting a little bit of this weird static stuff. And as you can imagine, I'm being really careful with this. I really don't want to crash this or hurt it, because as I said, it's not mine. My main problem actually seems to be that my RSSI signal from my this is an RXSR, I think, or some sort of XSR receiver, is not very strong, especially as I go out just a little bit further here. This is maybe 100 meters, and you see we've got quite a lot of static. Again, I deliberately am going behind myself because I thought I'd get the worst signal rather than going further, because I really wanted to see what the breakup was like. And this is another bit that I thought would be interesting. If we use this area and perhaps use that tree, we will find out what's happening. But even just going behind these relatively close in bushes there, you can see that we got quite a lot of breakup. It's quite different to what you'd call a regular analog breakup. It looks similar, but it's quite different in practice, mostly because it's sort of these blocks instead of single static lines. It takes up quite a bit more, so you do notice it a bit more. It's probably just a case of getting used to it, but yeah, definitely looks different. So here's what it looks just going behind a relatively small tree here. And yep, again we've got some breakup. So what I'd say about this is, in my opinion, we're getting more breakup on 25 milliwatts than we would expect on analog. I'm just doing that again a little bit lower. You'll see that, yep, it's definitely there. Now, just to show you how we got this picture quite way out, here's an idea of what the colour should look like from the GoPro, and you'll see it's quite a bit of difference there. Another thing to mention on this one is we are seeing a 1080p 30 recorded DVR picture, which isn't right. We should have been getting a 720p 50 frame a second recording, which we're not. There's been a firmware fix out there. I didn't know we were one behind, so I figured this would be right, but it's not. That would mean what you'd be seeing here would be a lot less jerky. So in my goggles, everything looks very smooth because you get the normal full frame rate. Just the recording image isn't looking that good, and I'm sure in 50 frames a second it would look a lot better. So what I did next is I plugged in the little camera control and I swapped over to use 200 milliwatts. and this is what the 200 milliwatt flight looked like. I do notice I'm getting no amps through my OSD, which is interesting because this Coppice One actually does have a proper amp meter and should be fine. So at 200 milliwatts, as we go around the tree here, it looks still breaking up, but looks a bit better. It's interesting, we kind of get these little dots appearing all over the place at certain locations. It would seem no matter what. Again, going behind myself, this time at 200 milliwatts, and I guess it looks better than 25 milliwatts, but not amazing in comparison to analog. But I wanted to do this to show the sort of the situation you had. And again, I am going behind myself. I should make that straight. So we're looking at the worst signal, but the worst signal is something I was interested in seeing. I should note as well that I'd neglected to turn off the camera ID, which is why we got that RunCam logo in the bottom there. But as it turned out, it wasn't a big deal. Now, I guess what's more interesting about this is how the actual picture was in the goggles. I have to say, when I first flew this, I looked through the goggles and I thought, it looks pretty good, it looks like a decent camera. And that's all I thought, it looks like a decent camera. I thought this is the same as analog. This is absolutely no different. If you put in a decent FPV camera, you will get the same image. And you can see here, I'm just trying to pick my way and see if I can see the little tiny scraggles. And honestly, I thought that is the same. And that is until I happened to fly an analog camera right after it. Now, I'm not really lined up there, but on the analog camera on the right hand side, I'm flying a Cadax Ratel at 200 milliwatts, which is a camera I really like. And it wasn't till I flew this straight after the Bytefrost and then went back to the Bytefrost that I realised that a regular analog camera did miss that sharpness. Now, even in the goggles, I could see that sharpness and extra detail that I couldn't see before was actually there when I looked at the Bytefrost, and that made it feel a little bit more impressive to me. Now, I have to say though, when I did talk to Rob about this, he said that, because I said I could see the difference even in my Dom V3s, and he thought that the difference was certainly there, but it seemed less so in the HDOs, because the HDOs made normal analog feel better still. So again, you still kind of need that extra resolution to really get the benefit from this, but it definitely is there. So after trying 200 milliwatts, I tried putting the power all the way up to 450 milliwatts, and I was presented with these dots, which a few people have reported. FatShark was saying it's either attenuation on the different antennas or it's loose antennas. Mine certainly weren't loose. You'll see that as soon as I switched it back to 200 milliwatts, it's absolutely fine and just looks right again. So I think we're going to need some more guidance or investigation from FatShark there about what the actual problem is, because clearly that wasn't a usable flight mode. So just shortly before we get on the last flight, I wanted to compare 25 milliwatts directly against digital and analog. And going around a direct obstacle here, you get a little bit of breakup in both, and that's absolutely fine. It's the times like now when we're not behind the obstacles, it's a bit weird. And when we're very close in, it's all okay. We get the little bit of flashing up on the digital, we can cope with that. We don't get anything on the pure analog system, of course. But when we go out a little bit further, and again, we're only 100 metres, maybe 200 metres to the end of the field here, you can see on the way out, and certainly on the turn when the antenna is behind us, we're getting quite a lot of breakup on the Bytefrost compared to 25 milliwatts on the analog system, where we're much lower down and we're not having any problems at all. That really renders it a bit unusable for that sort of distance. And with both VTXs at 200 milliwatts, you'll see that the difference is still quite a lot, with the analog barely making a noise going around a tree, and again not having any problems in going out some distance behind. Now, of course, we've got the benefit of a rapid fire here for the analog system, but we do have 4 antennas on the Bytefrost system, but we're still getting quite a bit of breakup, and on analog we are flying even a lot lower as well and still getting a much cleaner picture. So in terms of how it does compared to an analog picture, in terms of the static, it doesn't really get close, unfortunately, but it does produce a cleaner, sharper and HD image. So switching back to 200 milliwatts, I went for another flight, and I had a problem with it this time, and it wasn't anything particularly to do with the Bytefrost, rather my HDMI cable and my goggles. Now that's all the DVR recording I got here, but what happened is, and this is through my GoPro session, I took off, I circled around the tree, I was coming back, and at this point I completely lost the picture. I put my hand up to the cable, the picture came back and went again, and I had to disarm here and came down there. Yay for external buzzers, that was nice and easy to find, although it came up about 20 feet shy of the stream, so that was just lucky. So just to explain what happened in that crash, what I think happened is, if you see we've got this HDMI cable in the FatShark set, there is just a little bit of a loose, either a loose socket or a loose connector here, but having retested that cable's pretty dodgy anyway, so although I didn't pull against anything, just the slightest movement seemed to have caused an electrical contact to fail, and basically all picture is lost. Me wiggling it around just got it back, and then I had the disarm. Fortunately here's the quad, and you can probably see just that little dirt there, it seemed to have come down there. Nice big long wet grass. The actual unit's fine. I was just worried that it was going to hit that stream. That was pretty close. But I think it does illustrate a problem that any sort of tethered system runs a problem of the wire getting snagged or having a problem. It's particularly bad with HDMI cables because they always seem to come out and be sort of quite large heavy cables built around stuff, which doesn't bode well really for hanging out the bottom of something. Something, you know, if you can't even do a proper strain relief on this one because this part of cable's so thick. But that is both a worry to me and a word of warning for anybody who's got it. Make sure your HDMI cable is sat in there nicely. If you can do some sort of strain relief, it would be useful. But the other thing that was kind of interesting about that is the DVR recording actually cut off about 30 seconds before it crashed, and nothing happened to the battery. That stayed in okay. I expected to sort of lose the signal when it went down there, and thus the DVR would stop recording, but it stopped a bit earlier. And I was thinking about this, and aside from that dodgy cable, when I got back and tested the cable out, I sort of plugged the cable in here and tried it on another device and stuff, and it was still failing. Then I tried a good cable and that was fine. I plugged this in using the little power pack of my 18650s, and it lasted for about a minute before it completely went out of battery. And it does a really nasty thing actually when it runs out of battery. It powers up and then it basically powers down, and then it tries to come up again, so effectively you're caught in this reboot loop, which is really bad. You just want it to sort of stop and, you know, show a red light or something to say it's not got enough power. So the batteries in here absolutely got eaten really quickly. So I think any future flights that I might do in it, and a suggestion to you guys out there, is use a bigger external battery, because it just ate through that so quickly. I think I had it powered up for about an hour perhaps over the time I was messing around and stuff, but it's not a great deal of time. Now, I mentioned earlier in the video about that footage being in 1080p 30 where it should have been in 720p 50, so the resolution from the camera, that native resolution, albeit an analog HD camera, is 720p. So the fact it's going to 1080 means it's being scaled up, and the fact it's recording in 30 frames mean what you're seeing there is worse than what I saw through my goggles, because I had 50 frames per second frame rate, and thus it would seem a lot smoother. As I mentioned, there is a firmware update on this. FatShark have produced this page which has some details about a firmware update, the sort of problems they're getting reported at the moment and things they're doing about it. You'll see there as well the mention of the running at 450 milliwatts, and they're talking about some problems, but they haven't really come up with a good solution there. Although I do notice some people are managing to cope with it fine, other people aren't, which makes it sound like it's all about matching antennas up, but I think they need to look into that a bit more. So to actually update the system, and I have to say the manual was a little bit vague about this. First off, there's like a bunch of files you put on the DVR, and then it will write the DVR and write the VTX. It was a little bit vague about how the VTX is done. It said there'd been a supplied cable which you'd connect to the firmware port, which it didn't suggest anywhere in the manual. It doesn't actually like have a diagram saying this is this, this is that. It kind of worked out that on the back of the DVR here there is this little port there, and it seems to have a corresponding port here which is just next to that OSD port. Not that Rob actually remembered to put the cable that came with it in the box, so I haven't got the cable to do this. And I actually have to thank Blood's FPV there, because I wasn't sure if that was it, and I pinged him a message across and he was able to confirm that with me. That's what it was. He was also able to say as well that the update for this didn't actually do anything with the VTX, so if I wanted to just write it to the DVR and have that 50 frames a second at 720p fix, that would work. So big thanks to him. And Blood has done a whole bunch of tests on the Bytefrost as well, so you can check out his channel here if you want to get some more info there, some good videos about it. Now, time permitting, I'll try and do that update and do some more flying. It's just I've got a bunch more stuff down here that I do want to fly as well, and every time I want to think about this I have to take extra gear with me, so it's a bit of a pain, but we'll see what can happen. There were also some interesting questions from the last video about how open source this is, and I was checking it out because it seemed like it was a kind of open product. It partnered with these guys called HD0. There was some other guy called Analog Devices who did some of the chips on it. And looking through the website there, I don't see anything that suggests this is an actual open source product. I think what we have here is some sort of open implementation. So HD0 will essentially sell you the kit, and you can use your own firmware on top of it to do bits and pieces with. But one of the things that's explicitly mentioned on the HD0 site, and why I'm thinking this isn't open source at all, is it's got this encryption IC chip that has to be in the cameras to make it compatible with the HD0 system. And this is what those little A and B lines are on the camera. It's nothing to do with the actual signal. The signal is coming through a single line as basically HD composite, which I didn't think existed, but there you go. So in order to make yourself a camera that would be compatible, you'd have to buy in one of these chips to install it, which is not an open source product as far as I can see. You'd actually have to buy it in to do that. And perhaps that's where they're making money out of like a sort of open implementation as such. So let's talk about the flying aspect of it, because one thing I didn't mention is the latency, and I guess I didn't mention it because I really didn't feel any. That was really very impressive. It just felt like, as I said, it felt like I was flying a really nice camera. I didn't notice anything in the sticks at all when I was moving around. You know, I think it's fair to say that different systems and different cameras all have slightly different latencies, but if you really can't tell and you can go from one quad to another and not pick up any differences, I think that's pretty good, and I really didn't. So that's really good. There's no variable latency. It's all the same all the way through. So, you know, that's really good. Thumbs up for that one. I mentioned in the video that when I first tried it out, it felt like I was just using a good camera. And that's how it feels. When you always see these reaction videos to DJI, people are like going, wow, it's amazing, it's the best thing ever. And you really don't get that when you put Bytefrost on. I mean, I am using, don't forget, goggles that don't support that particular resolution. So that is one aspect of it. And in fact, I just thought, it just looks like a regular camera. It wasn't until I tried another quad which has a decent analog camera that I thought, actually, I'm getting a lot more sharpness and detail out of the Bytefrost. It just doesn't look like that at first, because it's not this massive jump, it's an incremental step. I've heard it referred to as like a sort of analog plus, if you like. It's the next step on, but it's not as far out as you want it to be, perhaps. And that in fact was quite interesting, because I'm dealing with goggles that basically have resolution that supports an SD camera, but when I'm giving it an HD image, even though the HD image is being scaled down, I'm still getting more detail out of it. So that part of the whole system is really quite impressive. Now, I did try out these box goggles with a 1080p screen, but I still really didn't get that wow thing. It looked nice, it looked big and clear, but it didn't look like it was on another level beyond what you already had. It's an incremental step, but it's not this massive leap. So in terms of that extra definition of picture, that was really nice. However, it then fell down on the sort of breakup. On 25 milliwatts, which is of course the legal limit in many territories, including this one. There was an awful lot of breakup there in places where you really wouldn't expect, and you could see something like the rapid fire on analog outperforming it really very easily around most places. Now, fair enough, I went behind myself, and that's because I didn't have enough range in front of myself to see what would happen. And although, you know, rapid fire is really good, this thing has, like, you know, 2 different receivers, both with diversity, trying to get the very best signal from it. So it's surprising it had that amount of breakup there. The breakup was like analog static, but sort of different. It was quite distracting to deal with at first, because there are those little blocks. Static is sometimes just these little thin lines you can almost not see because they're just little sort of blips. These seemed bigger and more sort of in your face. I guess if you just fly it more and more, you'd get used to it. And I kind of like the fact it does feel like analog static. There was just so much of it. Even when we popped the power way up to 200 milliwatts, there was much more there than you would have thought of. I'm sure though, flying in front of yourself relatively close range, not going behind stuff, you'd be absolutely fine. Your problem, I think, would come in if you were going behind trees, if you're doing any sort of bando environment and stuff like that. I just don't think it would hold up as well as analog, and I don't think it would be very usable for that. Can they improve that with the firmware? I don't know. I really hope they can, because if you had the same amount of breakup as you did with a good analog system, and you had that increased clarity of vision, then it'd be something much more attractive. As it is, I feel there are a number of problems with it. I mean, it's a beta product. It really does feel like a beta product. It's going to develop from a software point of view, but I do think this is actually more of a hardware revision behind. And why is that? Well, first off, you've got this external DVR. It's, you know, there's no getting around it. It's awkward. You have to take it apart, you have to put it on a tripod, you have to add 4 antennas to it, you have to power it externally, you have to plug in an HDMI cable going to your goggles, and you lose a few aspects that some really nice diversity systems like rapid fire gives you, like the ability to find your model based on the VTX strength and stuff like that, which is really nice. I also really missed the amount of information in the DVR I had or didn't have there. We had the basics, but I thought initially about putting this on a system with a GPS rescue mode, and then I thought, actually, I won't be able to see any of the GPS coordinates, I won't be able to see how many sats I've got locked if GPS rescue needs to come in, so that's another thing that kind of stops me trying to see what I can do with a range test, really. Again, this is something that may get fixed in firmware. I really hope so, because I like to see, you know, I couldn't even see what flight mode I was in, which I quite like to see as well. But really, for this to succeed, I really do think it has to come down to a module. And even at that point, to support it properly, the goggles are going to need to be at a sufficient resolution to support that. So you're really looking at a whole new increment of FatShark goggles, something that can support an internal version of this or something built in that's like that, with HD screens that can also do analog, because you'd want to fly everything, which is, you know, that's going to be quite expensive. And when you start comparing it to what DJI can do now, it's, you know, it's quite a tough sell. Interesting, FatShark just a few days ago on an Instagram feed released some little teasers of their new goggles, but the only feature they were really going on about is the fact it's got a power button, because everybody wants a power button, but nothing about the resolution, nothing about what system it was going to work with. It would be really nice to get those sort of details, because it really needs to be this all-in-one simple unit for it to really succeed, because these days we're all about convenience. We just want to get a pair of goggles, our controller and our quad, go out and fly stuff. So as you know, I got lent this system. I didn't get given it, and sort of crucially, would I spend $400 on this to buy it? And the answer to that right now is no. For the small gains you get, and it's like lovely image versus a lot of breakup versus the hassle of having to get it on the tripod and plug it in and all that, it's just not worth it for me. Analog's outperforming it, certainly in distance and breakup. So the only thing it's got going for it is this small increment in the clarity of picture. But as I said, if this could be boil down into a single pair of goggles which would support the native resolution, which would also support analog, I think they'd have a real prospect there. But for now, it's a no from me. As I said, time permitting, I will go out again. I will try and upgrade that to get the 50 frame per second 720p in the DVR. But I hope that's been helpful for now, and until the next time, catch you later. Bye for now. Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.